Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, with leaders, and with thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, I'm really delighted to be joined by Mark Redmond. Mark, you're very welcome to the show. And let's begin by maybe asking you to tell people a little bit about your background. You've been a chief executive on a number of occasions with very large, well-known organizations. Tell us a little bit about your journey and bring us right up to speed with what you're doing today. So over to you, Mark. You're very welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Simon. Really appreciate the invitation. And I guess my career has had a number of chapters, and probably I couldn't have predicted them at the start. I'm originally from Wexford in the southeast of Ireland and really enjoyed doing a degree in English literature and history in Trinity College, which I still draw on, actually, the stuff I learned there. But I wasn't really clear what my career path would look like, Simon. So if truth be told, I was very fortunate to be given the chance to work with what was then Price Waterhouse and now PwC in the tax advisory side of their business in Dublin. Now, I'm going back a bit, but I want to stress one of the things that I really learned from working with PwC was the whole question of client service and being really good in client service. But also, what really impressed me was my first three bosses were women, and there's great diversity of thought even at that early stage in terms of the people working in that environment. And I really drew on that. But I was always kind of passionate, Simon, about learning and development and realizing people's potential. So I got the opportunity to work with the training professional research representative body for the tax profession in Ireland called the Irish Tax Institute. And I had a number of roles there, ultimately leading to be chief executive of that organization. And that taught me so much. In particular, it taught me, I'm just going to say, how the system works. It taught me how to be an advocate that's credible. It taught me how to navigate, if you will, the corridors of power in terms of government and public service, etc. Then I was really thrilled, Simon, to get the opportunity to work with the American Chamber of Commerce Ireland as their chief executive. And I did that job for 10 years, which was just about the right amount of time, because I always have a smell test. If someone says to you, I can't imagine the organization without you, then you know it's time to move on and give someone else a chance and give the organization a fresh vision. So left the AmCham in really, really good terms, still very close to all the AmCham community. But I took a lot of advice from my small army of mentors, Simon, and I'm really grateful for all the mentors I have, stretching back over all phases of my career. And one said to me, look, Mark, whatever you do next, make sure you're passionate about it and it gives you purpose. So that's why in late March this year, I launched Redmond Coaching for Impact. And what that's really about, Simon, is me trying to give back to current and future leaders the lessons and learnings I've been fortunate enough to pick up over those various chapters of my journey so far.
That's incredible, Mark, and what a journey so far. And it's great to hear what's driving sort of the inspiration behind Redmond Coaching and this new business that you have. And obviously from back in the PwC days as a director and going on to becoming the chief executive of the Irish Tax Institute, I know that was almost a 10-year stint as well, I think. And then the American Chamber of Commerce, I'm very familiar with it, but it might be useful for our audience around the world just to understand the type of companies that are involved here, because these are some of the biggest companies and brands in the world that you've been working very, very closely with for the last 10 years, obviously with an Irish angle, but could you bring that to life a little bit for us?
For sure. And it's a global network, Simon. So nearly every country you visit, there will be a local American Chamber of Commerce. So we call it AmCham, AmCham Brazil, AmCham Lithuania, AmCham Korea, etc. Right? So it's a global network, but each entity is a standalone organization in the host country. So AmCham Ireland is a standalone, not-for-profit, non-partisan organization. And before I explain AmCham, it probably is no harm just to give your listeners and viewers a brief overview of the extraordinary two-way US-Ireland trade and investment relationship, because as you well know, the level of US investment in Ireland is, quite frankly, for a country of our size, truly off the scale. And in every sector you care to mention, and we can talk about some of them, Simon, but they are here in incredible numbers. But the lovely thing about this story is it is two-way. And what many people may not know is Ireland is the ninth biggest investor in the United States of America, and Irish companies employ over 100,000 people across all 50 states of the US. So what an AmCham does is a few things. It is the voice for those multinationals to the local administration. So AmCham Ireland is the voice of US multinationals and Irish multinationals in the States to decision makers here in Ireland. Secondly, it is the networking body of choice. So an AmCham is an awesome place to make connections, to network, to widen your pool of mentors, influencers, friends, and helpers. And thirdly, and this is kind of not true for all AmChams, but so true for Ireland, it's a source of leadership development, which is one of the things that really lit me up, Simon, when I was working with AmCham over 10 years. AmCham delivers amazing leadership development opportunities at every stage of an individual's pathway. So as you can see, lots of different touch points, but Ireland kind of unique because of that rather unique two-way US-Ireland trade and investment relationship.
Yeah, it really is incredible. I know there's an awful lot of events, maybe more than 100 at this stage, that everything from, Thanksgiving lunches to the annual sort of global conference and the dinners and things that I've been very privileged to be part of. But also the level of leadership, the level of access that you get to, I suppose, the top tier of American companies that are in Ireland. And as you say, the American Chamber really provides that voice. And, over your 10 years, you've really been that voice too, because you've spoke at many events, you meet, and I know you've been around the country meeting these huge American organizations in Ireland, in situ. And there must have been some great learning from that, Mark, along the way.
Huge amount, Simon. And let me just pick a few examples. First of all, when you consider the journey that Ireland has been on over, I'm just going to say US investment really kind of took off in the last 2 decades, but it's been taking over for 6 decades, right? When you consider the journey that Ireland has been on in any dimension you care to mention, but I want to pick one, which is pluralism, being a fair society, being a society that respects each and every individual. My goodness, has Ireland come on a journey, right? But the later end of that journey, some milestones. The first democracy in the world to vote by popular referendum for marriage equality, right? A country where, and one of the most heartening things happening in Ireland on a regular basis is folks getting citizenship, and the citizenship ceremony is just so beautiful. But at this stage, I think I'm right in saying in the last 8 years, over 200,000 people have got Irish citizenship. 1 out of 6 people living in Ireland were not born here. And why am I saying all this? Because, as you know, if you go into one of the US multinationals anywhere across the country, you'll meet the most extraordinarily diverse group of people. And, it's great they're diverse because they're serving global markets, right? And you look at trailblazers over that time, like Mary Robinson, the first woman elected president of Ireland. And my goodness, did she battle misogyny to get there? But she was a trailblazer. And the whole question of gender equality is transformed in our country now. So that's one thing. The second thing, Simon, which I think is so inspiring, is how US investment in Ireland has been so transformative for domestic Irish business. So US multinationals, between purchasing of goods, services, payroll, capital expenditure, they spend about 30 billion euro every year in the Irish economy. And while US multinationals directly employ 200,000 people here, those 200,000 jobs create a further 160,000 jobs in domestic Irish businesses. And the third and final thing, before I hand back to you, if you look at the transformation in our education system, and I'm picking 6 decades, Simon, for a reason, but if you go back to 1963, there were 27,000 people at university in Ireland, 27,000. In 2023, that number had risen to almost 280,000. So you know the knock-on effect that has on people's opportunity, quality of life. 63, 50,000 young people emigrating from Ireland every year. 2023, we're a country now that is friendly for people all over the world, and long may it be so.
No, it is staggering. And just some of the points that you've made there, and I think about foreign direct investment into Ireland as a country, the FDI work that's been done by many great people, including the American Chamber. But, the government has played a role in that too. Everything from the IDA and Enterprise Ireland and the great work that those two organizations do. But it brings this diversity of talent. It brings, as you say, jobs. And that special relationship with the US is something very unique, and I'm thinking of every year, some dignitary of some description will end up in the White House presenting a bowl of shamrock, for example. There is a certain magic between the US and Ireland that's hard to miss, that's for sure. But I want to come back to Mark, if I can. I want to move on a little bit in our conversation, because what you're doing now is equally as interesting. And you sort of hinted at the fact, you want to help people now, you want to give back a little bit. And that's very good to hear. But you're working on people when it comes to things like empowerment and growth and leadership and inspiration. And why is that important in today's society? We talk about things like trust and inspiration, and they're quite, uh, time-served traditions and important values. And we live in this world of digital and AI, and it's everybody's busy all the time. So what is it about the mission that you're on now? Tell us a bit more about what you're trying to do and how it actually works in practice, if you don't mind, Mark.
Great question, Simon. Let me begin by saying, in the broadest sense, our world is really lacking great leadership right now. I'm just making that in the broadest, a comment in the broadest sense, right? And a lot of the existential challenges facing the planet will only be properly addressed if you've got leaders who believe that leadership is about serving. It's not about themselves. It's about the cause or the people that they are serving. And you need leaders who are really self-reflective, really good at asking the right questions, really at narrowing down, and just on a journey, Simon, to uncover the truth. And I know I'm talking in very high concepts here, but filtering the fomentation from fact, right? So I passionately believe that, and I think that is as important for leaders who are not politically elected, but who find themselves in positions of leadership in a semi-state organization, in a university, in a multinational, in a charity, in an SME. So when I say I want to help leaders, I'm not being precious about where those leaders are. Once those leaders are passionate about fulfilling their potential, removing barriers within their control, I'm all in. Now, why am I doing this now? Because I also passionately believe, and I don't just believe it, I've experienced it. I don't think it's ever been as lonely to be a leader as it is today, right? Secondly, I don't think the pressures on today's leaders, they're so intense now, Simon, for all the reasons, some of which you've mentioned, right? So you've got I'm just going to call them the pressures in the marketplace. If you're a leader of a commercial organization, regardless of what kind of leader you are, there's the pressures in the public square to be your authentic self. There is the pressures in terms of the global uncertainty. There's the pressures in terms of who can we trust in terms of public leadership, in terms of news and media. And then, as you rightly say, I mean, the huge pressure on time, because we live in an instant world, a world of TikTok, where people are expecting rapid responses. And what's been crowded out? The ability to think, the ability to take time out, the ability to strategize. So all these things, for me, really interesting, really exciting. What we really need to, I think, just pay attention to supporting those brave folks who are putting their hand up saying, I want to be a leader, but I want to be a leader to serve.
Yeah, I really like that. And I really like what you said about having time to think. And it's such an easy thing to say. It's such a hard thing to do in practice. And I think you're right. It is one of the things that separates the leaders from the great leaders from the sort of average leaders. I think that's a astute observation. And to bring it into more practical terms, Mark, if you don't mind, I want to maybe expand the question a little bit. Because, and I'm asking you this because you have been very close to some of the most successful companies on the planet. And they have a particular way of executing on a strategy. And when we talk about leaders and leadership, a lot of leaders don't get that right. They might put a strategy together. They might decide this is the direction that they want to go in, but maybe they struggle to get stakeholders involved. Maybe the teams aren't engaged. And, you know, when it comes to implementing strategies or maybe the execution of strategies, is that a gap that you see in leadership? Is that something that you're trying to address through the coaching, through the programs that you have?
Yeah, it's, again, super question. And I'm going to say sometimes I think people get overstressed and overcomplicate strategy. Strategy has some really simple components, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but sometimes people just need to filter out the noise, not get overstressed, and just really think about what a great strategic process should look like and to what end. And the phrase "and to what end" is the really important one. I'm going to start with Simon. So you've got to know what the vision is. You've got to know what the goal is. You've got to know what your North Star is. One of my great mentors, and he's just an extraordinary leader in the medtech sector, he says to other leaders, would you put, and it's a sporting analogy, Simon, so I hope it's okay for your listeners who either play or watch sport. Would you put a team on the pitch, not tell them where the goal line is, not tell them what position they're playing in, and hide the scoreboard from them? No. So many organizations are failing one or all three of those pieces, right? So, first of all, you've got to know what the vision is. You've got to know what we're aiming for, right? Secondly, every member of your team needs to understand my role in that vision. Really explain to them they feel supported, they feel part of a team, they don't feel on their own, but they feel empowered, forgive the pun, to knock it out of the park. Thirdly, the scoreboard. You've got to measure progress. And here's the really, I tell you, Simon, the challenge this is for so many organizations. It's extraordinary in this information age. Getting the real data. Getting the real data that everybody agrees is the real data. Folks not being political, hiding the real data, trying to look good, and different sets of data coming on the same question from different parts of the organization. So it's these kind of really core hygiene things that people need to get right. But going back to our early part about the turmoil in the world, the really great organization, and you asked about, you know, the world leading organizations, the great organizations are the ones who can pivot and are not locked in. This is the strategy, guys. This is what we all agreed. This is what we told the board we can do. We can't deviate. You've got to be agile. You've got to be able to pivot. You also raise a really important point, which is the engagement piece. So I've brought a few organizations through various strategic plans. For me, one of the really exciting opportunities for the team, and it has to be team. This can't be, you know, hung on to and hugged by the leader. The leader has to bring the whole team here. It's an incredible opportunity to have really deep conversations with customers and stakeholders where you're not trying to sell something. You're going asking for their advice. What's on their minds? What are they seeing come down the tracks, opportunities and challenges? The more extensive and planned and purposeful your stakeholder, client, customer, student, whatever engagement can be that feeds into that strategy, the better. Final point before I hand back to you. And I passionately believe this one. And I think this is so important in the context of AI. Great leaders, great teams are defined by identifying the really great questions. The really great questions that they want to tackle. They may not have the answers at the start of their strategy, but by goodness, they know the questions that are going to inform that strategic journey.
Yeah, very insightful, Mark. I couldn't agree more. I love the, you know, the leader that can ask the right questions 100%. And you also talked about things about getting the right data, getting the right facts, you know, what is the truth, maybe if we can come back to that word a little bit, because there's so many dashboards and dials and different opinions and gut feels, and then there's the actual facts about what you're trying to do. And I love what you also said about sometimes you just need to demystify the strategy a little bit and just focus on what are we trying to do here? And again, I think it comes back to that, having a little bit of space to think about things, maybe logically, maybe clearer. And before we wrap up on this bit, because I do want to move on to another topic, I want to talk a little bit about equality, diversity, and inclusion, because you kind of touched on that when you started speaking initially, from your early sort of experiences of that, maybe at PwC. But in today's workplace, as you say, working in multinational environments, the workforce is extremely diverse, isn't it? And is that an area that leaders need help with? I know you attended recently, for example, the Dublin City University conversation about this with some leading experts to talk about ED and I. What are your thoughts on this when it comes to leadership, Mark?
And by the way, that was a really fascinating conversation facilitated by Katie Kyo in DCU. I have a few thoughts on this, Simon, and I will come at it from a place of privilege as a middle class white male living in a reasonably prosperous country that really has been very fortunate. So. And by the way, one of my heroes is my wife, who's a very senior figure in cybersecurity and an inspiration to women in tech. My points are as follows, and I think they're particularly important for people like me, and I've self-described here. Just don't join panels and give speeches. Really do your very, very best to understand, to the best of your ability, what the day-to-day reality is for people who do not have your privilege, right? And that can encompass a huge swathe of inequality and prejudice and imbalance. And let's pick gender here, Simon, right? Be forensic on identifying the barriers that women are facing to really realize their potential in the workspace. And one of the things I learned from DCU was, you can do so much, but the playing field is already imbalanced for the biological reasons that women bear children. And that can be a huge impediment for women in realizing their potential if the place of work, if the workspace, if the country doesn't truly cherish and recognize the extra demands placed on women. And you look at the Scandinavian countries and the way they approach paternity and maternity, right? And you look at, you do have to recognize the journey Ireland has been on, and we have been on a journey. But like an eye-opener for me on this topic of gender inequality was Dr. Martin McAleese, when he made the point, some discrimination or inequality that we're battling in the world is centuries old. Gender inequality is millennia old. It goes back to dawn, right? Therefore, the efforts and the concentration and the steadfast work on this must be unrelenting. So my key message, Simon, is probably twofold. A, it'd be really important for people like me to deeply understand the barriers that people not like me are facing. And B, to recognize this is so embedded, so ingrained, it requires constant vigilance and effort.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Mark. And I like the term, that sort of forensic investigation, that sort of taking the time to truly, I suppose, put yourself in somebody else's shoes for a day, So thank you for sharing that. To move us on a little bit more, if I can, before we run out of time, I want to ask you about how you approach things today when you think about what's on your roadmap, what's on your horizon. What are you thinking about? How does that work in your world when you consider the next 6, 12, 24 months?
Yeah, I think my purpose is to think on behalf of my coachees or my clients on the challenges and problems that may be coming down the tracks for them, both in the context of the organization they're working with, the sector within which that's working, but then the environment as well, Simon, that the organization is placed in. So my job is not just to be present and be a really confident or confidential source for my coachee or my client. My job is also to help them navigate those three spheres that they will be, please goodness, realizing their potential in, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, that's really important for me and what I'm trying to do is I'm giving about 30% of my time to pro bono causes and organizations. So again, I want to make sure I can be of use, and that's not just tokenism. And just to, again, going back to our deep thinking, to deeply think as to where I can be of most benefit in that space as well. So they're probably my two big focuses for next 2 years or so.
I love that, Mark. Really, really good, and such a great thing also to be doing a little bit of pro bono as well, and carving time out for that as well. So continued success there. Now,
Thank you.
finally, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our international audience while we have them either watching or listening to this episode? This may be something we've already discussed, or it may be something completely new. And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to connect with you and find out more about all this great work you're involved in today, where is the best place to point people to, Mark?
Thanks, Simon. So on the first one, I'd probably ask your listeners to think of two things, if I may. The first one is to really focus on the importance of democracy, because while a huge part of the world's democracies are voting this year, democracy, quite frankly, is under threat in some of the most established democracies on the planet. I am concerned that democratic representatives and I'm not speaking about Ireland here, democratic representatives are increasingly divorced from the realities of their constituents. And I do think we need to fix that for the sake of the next generations. The second thing I'd love people to think about is a wonderful quote from the wonderful Irish author Claire Keegan. And I've quoted this a bit. And Claire Keegan tells us, to fail to understand another, to fail to imagine another's life, spells the death of civilization. To fail to understand another, to fail to understand another's life, spells the death of civilization. Think about the geopolitical crises going on in the world right now, and think about if the protagonists had really, really worked hard to understand the other, would we be in this position? And you can apply that, Simon, to daily interactions, national movements, geopolitical crises. Thank you so much for asking about further information. My website is redmondcoaching.ie, and you'll also find me on LinkedIn, and happy to help.
Well, that's fantastic. It's a lovely human note to end on as well. So thank you, Mark, for sharing that quote and for where people can get hold of you. We wholeheartedly encourage people to go out and check out all the great work that you're doing. That brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. I'd like to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. And of course, go and check out everything that Mark's doing. I hope you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Mark. Mark, it's a real pleasure to catch up with you again today. Thanks for being on the show.
Likewise, Simon, a great pleasure. Thank you.